So both Stable Diffusion and DALL-E 3 are pretty good at creating large, high-resolution images. I wanted to create this icon inside of DALL-E 3, and we got there eventually, but it took quite a bit of time. And I wanted to compare it with Stable Diffusion. Now with Stable Diffusion, we did eventually get a result, but it took quite a bit of time. And let me describe the differences in process. So with DALL-E 3, we're inside of the web browser, and initially I'm working with different types of image, and I decided to create a logo or an icon for an educational organization just to test the capabilities of the software, of the model, and it came up with these ones here. So let's go back one, and you can see initially things were very promising. We have something that looked like a book with a student and something going on here which I don't quite understand, but photorealistic, really nice, and more illustrative. We've got a pen, we've got a quill pen, and we've got something going on here which I don't know, even an old style lamp, a study room with the students studying. I don't know if that's at all relevant for the modern age, but it was two pretty decent results, and I said, look, let's try a little bit more, and it came up with this one. This one was fantastic. We had a check mark, we had the blue pencil behind. It really represented everything I wanted in an icon, in a logo. Now interestingly, it didn't actually follow the prompt. It did something very different from the prompt. We've got a check mark there, we've got stylized pencil, but we've also got text. Now after those two images, we then tried some more, and it came up with a whole variety of designs, but it was going at one design. I don't know, this user interface is so confusing sometimes. It was going at one design every single render. So I would give it a prompt and then it'll come back with a design. This is obviously not usable. It's not exactly like the original one. And this one, we've got something that looks like a check mark, but it's kind of incorporated. It makes it look like the pencils, some type of arrow pointing down. That's not what we want for our educational establishment. And then we've got one here, which I don't know if it's a bit busy. The check mark just looks again like an arrow. So it was very difficult to actually get the software to obey the prompt, which was really just calling for a check mark and a pencil. But I could see that there was potential inside of DALL-E. So we continued with this, and it's giving me one image per prompt. It's just taking a few minutes to come up with each of these designs, which was extremely frustrating. Now let's go and take a look at some of the further ones, and it kind of loses its way sometimes. Now I tried to actually see if it can give me several designs at the same time, and it says I can generate multiple images based on different prompts in a single request, but they're created one after the other, not simultaneously. Now in the past we used to get 4 images created at the same time, so you'd have a bit of variety. Now it's just creating 2 images, and then sometimes it's just not creating any image at all. Over here we've got 2 images, neither of them is satisfactory, so I have to use up more prompts, and the amount of prompts you can use in DALL-E 3 in ChatGPT 4 are actually limited. Neither of these new ones did anything good. This one had half a check mark, but the idea, generally speaking, was fine. And then here it had arrows rather than check marks, and the idea was good, but I just really needed check marks, and we had to go through a couple more designs. Here it only gave me 1 response, and as you can see, the user interface sometimes just gets a little bit weird and wonky. There we are, it's come back, and it gave me these 2 further designs, none of them exactly what I want. And then I just went back to scratch, said, look, I'm going to give you very basic instruction. Come on, just give me a minimalist logo for an educational organization. Went back to scratch. It gave me something pretty neat here, and then something, not sure about that. And then if we just click there, hopefully it comes up. There we are. We started getting some more useful ideas. Still not what I want. And then it just gave me nothing, just a whole nothing, until we got to these 2 images. Just gave me blank responses. Then we got these 2 images. This was back to what I was actually looking for. This one was actually fairly close. I wanted there to be some space between the check mark and the pencil. And this one was a little bit closer. It reminds me a little bit of some of the early iconography that we had inside of the earlier Apple devices. So let's see if we can finally get the one that we got. the one that I wanted, I knew it could do something like this, but it was so difficult to get there, and it took a long time. It took some time to get away from the software, just come back refreshed, and then to try again, and eventually it gave me two pretty decent designs. This one, the only complaint will be this little mark here, which is giving a bit of a little bit of a fade to the check mark, but otherwise this one looks good. This one also looks good. So I like those illustrative styles, and I wanted to see if we could get this inside of Stable Diffusion. Now, inside of Stable Diffusion, the biggest problem, I'm using Comfy UI, which is probably the most powerful version, and it was difficult. It was really difficult. And in the end, I found out that it didn't actually understand the prompt that I was giving it. Now, as we work with this software, it's important to understand this software can produce fantastic images like these guys here, and it doesn't get confused when you have a prompt describing an image that it can actually work with. But when we put in the prompt from the earliest prompt from DALL-E 3, this was the sad result that we got. This is kind of confusing. I'm literally using the same response that we got from DALL-E 3, and it's literally giving me this weird, I can see a pencil there, but that was all that was good in that one. And this one was the closest that we got to a logo with a check mark and a pencil. But I did try with the DALL-E 3, you sometimes are limited just to one image at a time. With this software, I can go ahead and just say, give me 4 images at a time. Give me a batch of 6, 10. I've had batches of 10. So it can create lots of images in an output. And as long as your system is powerful enough, you can actually produce a huge number of different variations and then choose which variation you want to keep. So I started playing around with some of the variations, and I produced quite a lot. Some of them were less successful than others, and I was varying the prompt all the time. So that was the starting point. We moved to there, and it gets a little bit more illustrative. And the main thing that's changing is basically this. It's called the seed, and it's the starting point. I'm also changing the prompt to try to bring out something a little bit different. Now, before we go on, you might think this is all looking pretty bad, but I want to show you something that is special inside of Stable Diffusion. Now, because Stable Diffusion can handle plugins, we can add plugins that can produce certain types of effect. So this is a plugin called a LoRa file that can produce icons. We just need a single word of text, a dog, and it does the rest. That's a bike, spider, a car. And these plugins are called LoRas. You can get them for free. They can be very easy to install inside of Comfy UI, and they can completely transform the operation. But I wanted to test the software without actually using third party. And the closest that we actually got to having a check mark was this. The problem with Stable Diffusion is that I don't think it actually understands the word check mark. So after quite a number of frustrating examples, I put in a very simple instruction, a minimalist logo showing a photorealistic pencil in front of which is the symbol of a check mark. And with that, we got this result here. There's no check mark. And I began to realize this thing does not know what a check mark is. And in the end, I did try to include multiple versions of the word check mark, check mark, tick mark, correct mark. And it didn't understand any of those. It did not produce a check mark or anything. Kind of got the basic idea of a pencil and drawing and education, but it didn't understand the word checkmark. So it was impossible for this software to produce a checkmark. And that was the limitation here. So that was the lesson. So sometimes with Stable Diffusion, the model sometimes lacks basic knowledge on things like objects. In this case, a symbol. And the overall impression I have is that with Stable Diffusion, although it is powerful, it can produce really, really nice images, natural looking images. It has got this struggle with certain types of words. And if you find that word is in your prompt, you're not going to get a result. So I think even if we were to use the LoRa file, which will take a couple of minutes to set up, we wouldn't get the check mark. So it's impossible to create that particular logo using the software. You can use certain files to try to force it to produce a particular shape, but then that gets really complicated. But there's a limitation. And the point about the limitation is that if it doesn't know what a check mark is, it's probably not been trained on content like icons and logos, because they quite often contain that type of word. So there are limitations, and I think the overall impression is that Stable Diffusion is designed for one type of image, the kind of image that you see here, and it's not designed for a different type of image. DALL-E 3 and Stable Diffusion have got different use cases. Now, you can do amazing things with Stable Diffusion, and I really like its capabilities. One of the things you can do is just to say to it, produce variations of an image, give me 20 variations, and you can come back after an hour and see the results that you got. And that's something you can't do with DALL-E. So whilst there are limitations, there are definitely times I'm going to be coming into Stable Diffusion just to use the convenience of the software, of the setup. And there may be other times I will go into DALL-E 3 because it has got these other capabilities that Stable Diffusion is still kind of lacking. Just a quick reminder that I have got a course over at Udemy, which is the Learn Generative AI with SDXL course, Stable Diffusion and Comfy UI. This course will cover some of the basics of Stable Diffusion and Comfy UI and help you get started in understanding this new software. Pixelvert Studio also has a number of other lectures covering Automatic 1111 and more advanced features of Stable Diffusion, Comfy UI, SDXL, and progressing on to the mastery phase. Now, the courses have also been extended now to show DALL-E 3 with ChatGPT 4 for those of you who want to get amazing results using that software.